Good morning. Would
Good
you like to
morning, Lisa.
introduce yourself to us? And
I I certainly will. I certainly will. I am Reverend Catharine Clarenbach. I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister, and I generally go by the name Qira Clarenbach. That has been my name in my other religious community for a long time, the Stone Circle tradition of Wicca, which was founded a little over 25 years ago. So I have a dual religious path in Wicca as well as doing work in Unitarian Universalism.
awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And I know that you have shared with Reverend Amy's spiritual direction classes before. And
Mhm.
so, can you give us a little brief history of how you came to do spiritual direction and
Sure.
your other work with spiritual work?
Yeah. Um, I first heard of spiritual direction when I was involved with Order of Roman Catholic Religious Sisters, the Sisters of St. Joseph. And there it's interesting. The word spirituality gets used in two different ways, right? One is the way that most people use it, which is how we practice spiritually, whether or not it's in a religious context. In Roman Catholicism, there are like different religious orders have a different spirituality, which is like the flavor or focus of the community's spiritual practice. And I mention that because the spirituality of the Sisters of St. Joseph is very similar to that of the Jesuits. So it's an Ignatian spirituality after Ignatius of Loyola. Spiritual direction is very, very important in that context. Everybody who's a sister of St. Joseph has a spiritual director. And as someone from the time I was 4 years out from moving into a convent, which where I lived for a year, I had a spiritual director. And so I learned from them at first by having spiritual directors, and then in a little while later by training to become a spiritual director. So that's sort of where that started for me. But I have been doing mentorship in a pagan context since 1994, especially with teenagers. I was doing what, looking back on it now, was very similar to vocation, discernment, and spiritual direction, but we didn't call it that.
So from back then, I imagine that your practice, your use of spiritual direction, and your giving of spiritual direction has really changed. Can you give us a little information on how that's changed
Hmm.
over the years for you?
Sure. My first, it's a little complicated depending on how you count, but my first spiritual director was Sister Paula Drass. And she had been a sister of St. Joseph for 35 years at that time. And this is, 20, more than 20 years ago. Um, and she was in leadership in the congregation. She is an introvert and taught me something very important with respect to my spiritual practice, which is that she said flat out, extroverts are at a disadvantage in the spiritual life. And I was like, And she said, because it's harder for you to be quiet and
Mm.
alone, and you need to do those things in order to be able to listen to your heart. Because Ignatius of Loyola says, and I still use this, um, the will of God is written in the deepest desires of our hearts. And that spending time with our hearts is essential to the work of the spiritual life. And working with my clients, and I call them clients, sometimes seekers, but I don't think there's a negative resonance to that. So I don't worry about it. Um, Helping my clients think about what are the deepest desires of their hearts is actually something that hasn't changed over time. I later had a pagan Buddhist UU spiritual director um, who said to me, sometimes spiritual direction is about hearing about the Red Sox. Like sometimes spiritual direction is having a conversation that looks not super deep from the outside, but is getting at something that often will come up later, right? If somebody comes to you in spiritual direction and they're bringing um, the Red Sox, okay, like we're going to talk about that. But at some point in the session, I'm probably going to ask them a question like, why do you think you wanted to talk about the Red Sox today? Or, I have many clients who are Unitarian Universalist ministers, and they'll start off talking about all the drama in their church and what they're doing. And I just wait. Like, we'll talk for a while, and then I'll say, so that was a lot of information. And it's clear that that's really important to you. Where is it with your heart right now? Like, where is your heart right now? Which is a version of what the Sisters of St. Joseph say, which is, how is it with your soul?
Mm.
Right.
So I have to ask:
Um,
is there something more to the Red Sox, or is that just like a
an
random
example.
general?
It was just an example, like baseball, right? It's going to be about baseball. The Boston Red Sox in this
Okay, I was
case.
thinking real socks.
No, no Sox. The SOX. I'm glad you asked. So also, my practice has changed because I primarily work with people who have been isolated or alienated from or by traditional religious contexts.
Mm.
So I have an East African client right now who's really struggling with, why am I practicing Catholicism when it is the religion of oppressors and colonizers in my community, right? I work a lot with ministers. And the reason I'm working with people are like, wait, how do those go together? Someone who's alienated from religion but is a minister? And what that's about is that there are so many ministers who have UUs in particular, who have a deep, often earth-based practice that they can't be open about in the context of their congregation. It doesn't feel safe for them for whatever reason, based on the sort of personality of the congregation, to be open about their beliefs or practices.
Yeah, it's got to be hard.
Mhm. Yeah. And ministers also spend all their time ministering, and very few people minister to them.
Yeah. So how has um how has your feelings um changed about uh being a spiritual director over the
Mm.
years?
So, how has my practice of spiritual direction affected my own spirituality? Am I understanding your question?
Yeah, and how has
Okay.
it kind of changed over the years?
Mm. Well, one thing is that I've been in spiritual direction all this time, right? For myself. And I see my spiritual director twice a month. And I'm also in spiritual direction supervision. So, spiritual direction supervision has been so helpful. And it's something that, there's lots of spiritual directors who don't have supervision, they don't do it. And even before I had to, to belong to certain professional organizations, I've always been in supervision. And so what what has changed for me is that my spiritual life is more integrated into my whole life,
Mm.
Also, my religious community of the Stone Circle tradition of Wicca, I've been with them since 1999. So that has had a huge effect on me. Um, as Unitarian Universalists go, I am more extroverted than most Unitarian Universalist ministers. I'm also more mm, blood, sweat, and tears than most UU ministers. Like, I want to go outside and have ceremony and not care if it rains, right? Like, um, and I
This is
think,
Portland. They shouldn't care if it's raining anyway.
yeah, that's true. But so changes in my spiritual life have been that I'm even more committed to my clients' regular spiritual practice because I know how much it is helping me.
Mm.
Right. When I first went into spiritual direction, I was kind of exploring but it has shaped my entire life. When I was very, very, very sick in 2021 and 22, the practice of surrender, which I would have been like, no, thank you. Enough surrendering in my Catholic background. No. Um, but I had a different experience of that, a different context for that because I was in spiritual direction and because I had watched my clients go through their own processes that involved having to radically let go or surrender to the circumstances they were in, consistent with their own theology. Because that's another big thing is that I don't have much of a theological agenda for my clients, and that's always been true.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because that's kind of another question that I had. Like, how does that work for you? How does it work for you? I mean, what I know of you is you're pretty grounded in your pagan community, and so how does it work for you to be able to be um, open to your East African
Mhm.
client who's in Catholicism?
Right? Well, in that case in particular, it's a really good example. I was very devoutly Roman Catholic for years. I was the most religious member of my family. And I do not describe myself as a recovering Catholic. I say that I used to be Catholic. I I understand why people who have theological and political differences, difficulties, struggles, fights, you know, with Catholicism, why that is, even if they stay, right? Even if they stay, particularly if they are in an ethnic context that meshes in with their Catholicism, it's home for them. So that particular example is very close to home for me. Like, I understand why people would love to go to Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, which is like, people are going, what? What is that? It is a term of art in Catholicism. But I also have been part of a Quaker community. I went to a mainline Protestant seminary and I attended early in my marriage. So, like 2003, I attended a Reformed synagogue. I've always had close Jewish friends with whom I talked about Judaism. I had a particular study of Islam in seminary, and my undergraduate degree is in myth and religion. So I studied like comparative religions all day long. So I have a more checkered religious history than a lot of people. I've been a lot of places. And not only that, but like when if somebody literally is coming at this from a tradition that I know nothing about, but they really want to work with me and we have a good personal rapport, I'm going to ask them to tell me, I want to know what people's theology is anyway. Whether one person's theology is going to be the nature of community, right? The supporting of and being supported by community. Another person is going to be very, very theist, and another person is going to be a member of an African diaspora religion, which I was also invited into for several years. And you may have noticed that I say for several years, a lot of times these are overlapping, right? Like I was engaged with an African diaspora house while I was in the early years of Stone Circle Wicca. That was where I was a beloved friend and visitor. I was never like identified with La Regla de Ocha or Santeria. Um, but I knew people in the house. They welcomed me to ceremonies. You know, I was around a lot.
I'm glad you mentioned that they were overlapping. I was beginning to start adding things up and thinking,
Right.
"Hey, she's
Yes.
much
Yes.
older
I'm
than I thought
almost
she was."
52. Yeah. I
Well,
should figure that out, like make a timeline and
yeah, that would be kind of interesting. Your theological growth timeline.
Mhm,
So along those lines, and I'm
mhm,
I'm kind of going off script here on what I was really going to focus on and discussing with you, but I'm finding this really interesting. Um, so you do have a lot of experience in a lot of different religions, theologies, ritual, um, and yet I hear a lot of times from other spiritual directors, you know, the words may be different, the rituals may be different, but the underlying is all the same. And so I'm wondering what your experience is of that, and do you think that like we are doing a disservice to somebody to do spiritual direction with them if our theologies don't match up?
That is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it because I don't believe that it's all the same. The language is different, but the goals are the same. And the reason I don't is that if you look at mystical practices across religious traditions, they are much more similar, right? Like Roman Catholic mystics and Sufis and Buddhists who are doing their time in the forest, right? Young people who are doing in the forest is sometimes literal, but often figurative. Um, those people, especially people in religious communities like monks and nuns, are going to be more similar to each other. But there is a book that I recommend highly called God is Not One, like the number one,
Mhm.
by Stephen Prothero. And he talks about how the goals of the sort of rank and file, rank and file is a really weird way to say that, but the goals of most of the people in a tradition are different. So in Christianity, questions of salvation are important. In Judaism, questions of peoplehood are important. Salvation in I mean, yes, you're going to say, may you be inscribed in the book of life. Yes, atonement and acknowledgement of the ways that we hurt each other is present in Judaism, but especially in Reform, Reconstructionist, and Jewish renewal traditions. And, you know, it's just a different question. It's about identity and peoplehood and how, if you look at the cycles of the holidays in Judaism, they're much more about what has happened to this people, right? From
Yeah.
Passover to the Shoah, right? Thinking about the Shoah or the Holocaust. Um, Whereas in, say, Roman Catholicism, it's about in Advent, which is the start of the Catholic year, we have this sort of combination of expectation, right? Christmas is coming, but it's not here yet. And um, and Lent, which is a time of purification, and it's like a long atonement season. um, but the aim is to get to heaven, right? That's a different thing. I don't, in some of the Eastern religions, the idea is to get off the wheel of life,
Mhm.
the wheel of suffering, right? In Wicca, we're like, no, bring on the wheel of life. The wheel of life is great, you know? Um, so I think they are really different. And that's part of why, um, if at a certain point I felt like someone, like, I probably would not work with somebody who was a really committed member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Because don't know enough. I don't know enough positive things about that tradition among the people that I know, the experiences that I've had, the books that I've read, to be to hold a space that would really be a sacred conversation. There's a part of me that would be like, why are you Mormon? And I'm probably being a little hard on myself in that description, but because I would do my best. But I think it's important to have some clue about the person's background, but they can tell you and you can ask them, you know? Um, and like if they're Unitarian Universalist, for example, unless they're a minister or someone who has really thought about this a lot, I don't usually expect Unitarian Universalists to be able to articulate a coherent theology to me because most of us Unitarian Universalists don't have one,
Yeah.
right?
So I wonder if one of the things that stood out for me, and even though you said you were being hard on yourself, um, is that you didn't have enough information to feel like you could be unbiased in the
Yeah.
conversation. And um, so what I'm hearing from that is if I think I can hold space and hold curiosity and
Mhm.
um, and feel like that relationship can move forward, and without my bias of the religion,
Mhm.
then I can work, then the
It
relationship
could work
can,
out. It could
but
work out. Yeah.
but I have to be clear enough within myself to understand my own biases. And
And with my client, I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to tell them, like, this is where these are the kinds of things I know. And, if it was someone who was struggling with alienation, I think there's a lot of work that we could potentially do depending on where that alienation was coming from. Because I can just show up and hold the space. I do something that I do for most of my spiritual direction meetings is to begin with some kind of quieting of the heart, right? Some kind of arrival, some kind of breathing. And that for me is like people love it or hate it. And if they hate it, they're not my people. And that's okay, right? That's all right. And it's okay if someone needs a different kind of spiritual director. Like, I want to serve the people who need what I have to offer. I don't want to try to shoehorn a person into, like, I don't want to be so needy and think I have to keep every single person who ever contacts me for a consultation. No, I will refer people to people I know. Or sometimes I'll say, here are the kinds of qualifications or experiences that you might want to look at in a spiritual director that I don't have. And I think that's a really important skill is to be able to discern that.
So I hear in you a lot of self discernment, a lot of looking inward, a lot of your own spiritual development. Um, my first impulse is to say, is it worth it to to
Yeah.
to have all that, and to have all that internal constant looking in order to do this job? And I guess I'm kind of hoping that it is, because I enjoy internal investigation as a one
Mhm.
on the Enneagram. I do it all the time. So, um, but for other people, that's not as easy,
Mhm.
and I would think if you weren't comfortable with it, it would make the job very hard.
I have to do it. Like for me, I said in therapy one time, I had a new therapist, and she said, "What are your therapeutic goals?" Right? Like, what are we doing here? And I said, I want to be happy, joyful, or no, I want to be joyful, fruitful, and wise.
Mm.
That's what I want in life. So if that's what I want in life, I am in the right business and I am um, delighted to, and also spiritual direction, my spiritual direction at least, isn't always like navel gazing. Let me think only about my deepest, deepest, deepest thoughts all the time. Like, it's not like that. Sometimes it's trying to work out how am I responding to an external event. Um, so, I mean, it's even if I weren't a spiritual director, I would be in spiritual direction, before because I mean, I was, right? Like, I was in spiritual direction before I um, started doing this work professionally. And for me, I think it's also worth saying my one on one spiritual direction has also branched out into various other things, right? My way of the river, which is my little container, my business container, um, also holds various classes and groups and um, helping Unitarian Universalist minister or people become ministers. Um, so one-on-one spiritual direction is not the only thing that I do. I think it requires a truly unique set of circumstances for someone to make it on their own as just doing one-on-one spiritual direction. I think that's hard. And it would take someone with a bigger reach than I have. But I love doing groups and classes and retreats and stuff, so that's fine.
Well, and I think that goes back again to your ability to self-reflect
Mhm.
and know what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Um,
Mhm.
so I love the joyful, spiritual, and wise, and I had to type it down so I wouldn't forget it because
Joyful, fruitful, and wise.
joyful, fruitful, and wise. So good, thank you.
Joyful, fruitful, and wise.
I'm glad I reset it so that I would have it correct.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to finish this up by doing kind of a speed round.
Okay.
So
I'm ready.
just a word or two to answer the
Hmm.
question. Okay.
Okay.
Divine is
Yes.
yes. God is.
Eh.
Spiritual direction is.
Beautiful.
My favorite book.
The Lord of the Rings.
Favorite dessert.
Creme brulee. Or lemon bars.
Both both two very good choices. Well, Qira, it's been awesome talking to you in this way because I got to know you a little bit better and
Mhm.
um, a little history about you. And I really, really want to tell you how much I love and appreciate you. And I'm so grateful that you're in my life.
Lisa. Oh my goodness. Thank you so, so, so much.
And thank you for
That is
doing this with me.
incredibly honoring to hear. Like, I just thank you.
It comes from my
Thank
heart.
you.
And that's what you've taught me is to stick to my what's in my heart.
What's in your heart? That's right. Your heart is trustworthy.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say
Yeah.
is that the motto of my, um, one of the like stones in the foundation of my work is encouraging myself and other people to be persistently gentle and gently persistent. That and your heart is trustworthy are like the stones for me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll see you soon.